In the middle of a silent forest night, Tom Miller stopped his old truck when Cooper began growling toward a dark ravine. What would you do if your dog sensed something you could not see? And what if climbing down, you found a crashed pickup, a trail of blood, and a frightened girl hiding among the rocks? Why was her mother taken? Who was dumping poison into the creek? And why would a sheriff hunt the truth instead of protecting it? This journey will remind you how courage grows when a man, a child, and a loyal dog hold on to each other. Before we begin, tell me where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. The late afternoon light settled over the Appalachia foothills like a thin veil of fading gold. The air was cool and dry, with a faint scent of pine drifting along the trees. A quiet breeze moved gently across the rust-colored leaves that blanketed the slopes, and the distant ridgelines stood dark against the soft sky. The world felt still enough to breathe, yet heavy enough to remember. That stillness was the place where Tom Miller tried to build a small, fragile life for himself. Tom Miller was 40 years old and carried the look of someone shaped by both duty and hardship. His body was lean, with the kind of strength earned through labor rather than training. His shoulders were broad and his posture straight, but the tension in his neck often betrayed long nights without rest. His hair was short and dark, with a few early threads of silver. A trimmed stubble lined his jaw and framed a face marked by sun, grit, and memories that never fully left him. His eyes carried a deep brown shade softened by exhaustion. They held both a guarded distance and a quiet sorrow. Tom had returned from the Middle East after years of service. He never spoke about the details, but the shadows in his gaze revealed their own history. The explosions he once ran toward now followed him in his dreams. The routines that once built safety now haunted him in the dark. After returning home, he settled on the outskirts of a small mountain town and found work as a mechanic. During the day, he repaired engines for old pickup trucks and off-road vehicles. During the night, he battled the heavy silence that reminded him of everything he lost. He lived in a small, weathered trailer parked near the line where the forest grew thick. The trailer was dented on one side with worn steps and peeling paint, but Tom kept the inside neat. It was the closest thing to order he could control. When the world became too loud, he stepped outside to the wooden chair beside the door and breathed in the smell of pine sap and cold earth. Some nights, he sat awake for hours listening to the sounds of owls and distant water. That quiet became his anchor. But the strongest anchor in his life was Cooper. Cooper was a German shepherd about 5 years old, with a thick coat of sable and black. His ears stood high and alert, and his amber-colored eyes followed Tom everywhere with unwavering attention. He was large and muscular, with a presence that carried both confidence and calm. There was an intelligence behind his gaze, and a gentleness reserved only for his companion. Cooper had been trained as a working dog, but never deployed. Instead, he found Tom through a rescue center months after Tom returned home. Cooper recognized something in Tom, and Tom recognized something in him. Since then, the dog had become Tom's closest friend and the only witness to his restless nights. Whenever Tom woke from a nightmare with his chest heaving and sweat chilling his skin, Cooper would rise from beside the bed and press his head against Tom's ribs, listening to the frantic thumping beneath. That steady presence anchored Tom back to the present each time. Cooper never judged and never questioned. He was simply there in the unconditional way that animals knew how to be. Life was hard for Tom. The bills were constant, and his wages were barely enough to cover essentials. Because of that, he took extra jobs whenever he could. Gigs like delivering spare parts for the garage owner brought in a few extra dollars. On some nights, he drove the twisting back roads of the mountains carrying boxes of bolts, filters, and belts to remote customers. The drive was long and lonely, but the silence suited him. Cooper sat in the passenger seat watching the world blur past the window. On this particular night, the sky had deepened into a dark shade of blue. The moon had not yet risen, and the narrow mountain road glimmered only under the headlights. The engine hummed, and the tires gripped the pavement while wind pressed softly against the truck. Tom kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Cooper's back. He felt tired, but focused. Every delivery mattered when rent approached and groceries were low. As the road climbed higher, the forest thickened on both sides. Pines grew tall and shadows pooled between their trunks. The air smelled colder at this altitude. Cooper's ears pricked forward as he stared out the window, scanning the dark slopes that stretched downward. Tom noticed the shift in the dog's posture. Cooper rarely showed tension unless something was truly wrong. "You all right, buddy?" Tom murmured in a low voice. His tone meant to soothe, though the worry in his chest tightened. Cooper let out a low, rumbling growl. It vibrated through the small cab. Then he turned his head sharply toward the right side of the road. His body leaned forward, as if urging Tom to stop. Tom slowed the truck and pulled onto the narrow shoulder. The edge of the pavement dropped steeply into a rocky slope filled with brush and loose soil. The angle was sharp enough that only the glow of headlights revealed anything at all. Cooper whined and pressed his paws against the dashboard, staring intently into the darkness below. Tom stepped out of the truck, the cold air brushing against his face. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the guardrail. He leaned over cautiously and looked down the long slope. At first, he saw nothing but scattered rocks and brush. Then something metallic reflected the light. Tom focused his eyes and felt his stomach drop. Halfway down the slope lay a pickup truck overturned on its side. The front bumper was crushed against a boulder. One of the doors hung wide open. A smear of dark red trailed down the metal panel. Tom's breath tightened. His pulse quickened. The memories from overseas flickered in the back of his mind. The scenes of broken vehicles and sudden ambushes. He shook them off, but the tension remained lodged deep in his chest. He forced himself to look closer. Cooper stood at his side, staring with the same intensity. Tom scanned the area, searching for movement or any sign of a person. As he stepped a little farther along the guardrail, something small caught his eye. A tiny object lay near a cluster of dry weeds close to the broken truck. It was a shoe. A child's shoe. The sight pierced him more sharply than the blood on the door panel. It was a small sneaker, scuffed and dirt-stained. Its presence on that lonely slope twisted something deep within Tom. He felt the familiar surge of fear and urgency rise in his chest. Whatever happened here was not just an accident. Someone was hurt, and somewhere a child was missing. Tom steadied his breathing, trying to push down the panic that threatened to surface. He had seen too much and lost too much to let emotion take over now. He had to think. He had to move. Cooper nudged his hand as if urging him to act. The dog's muscles were tense, ready to follow wherever Tom went. Tom looked down at the overturned truck again, then back at the tiny shoe. A heavy weight settled inside him. The night that had started as another simple delivery had changed into something else, something darker, something that called on a part of him he thought he had buried. He whispered softly more to himself than to Cooper, "We are not walking away from this." And with that promise echoing in his mind, Tom prepared to descend the slope. The fear in his chest remained, but a deeper instinct pushed him forward. Someone needed help. A child was involved. And Tom Miller, the man who once ran into danger for strangers, felt that old sense of duty returning like a quiet ember catching flame. Beside him, Cooper let out a steady breath and stayed close, ready to follow wherever the night would lead. The early night settled over the mountains with a cold stillness that pressed gently against the trees. The sky above the Appalachia foothills was a deep shade of indigo, and only faint stars pierced through drifting clouds. The forest air was damp and carried the scent of wet soil mixed with crushed leaves. Every sound seemed to echo softly, as if the woods were holding their breath. That quiet wait followed Tom Miller as he stood on the steep slope staring down at the overturned truck. The child-sized shoe still rested in the weeds, and Tom felt his chest tighten with a mix of dread and duty. Cooper remained beside him, his ears high and his amber eyes sharp as he surveyed the darkness below. The worry inside Tom built slowly, at first, then surged like a pulse through his spine. This was no simple accident. Someone had gone off the road with force enough to roll the truck, and the presence of that small shoe pierced him deeper than any memory from his service years. He forced himself to breathe evenly. He had learned many times that panic clouded judgment. He had also learned that fear for others always ran deeper than fear for himself. Cooper stepped closer to the edge and sniffed the cold air. The dog lowered his head, then let out a low, soft whine. Tom knew that sound. It meant there was life nearby. Not just danger, but someone alive and close. Without needing further confirmation, Tom moved toward the slope, searching for a safe way down. Vines hung across the crumbling dirt, and scattered rocks jutted sharply from the hillside. Cooper stayed pressed at his side, ready to follow, with absolute trust. They descended slowly, with Tom gripping roots and branches to keep his balance. Loose soil slid under his boots, and small stones rattled down the incline. The cold night air brushed against his face, while the forest around them felt vast and endless. When they reached the base of the slope, Tom paused, letting his eyes adjust to the deeper shade of darkness. Cooper sniffed the ground, then turned sharply to the left. His body stiffened, and he took several careful steps forward. "Good boy," Tom whispered in a steady, low tone. Cooper started moving with purpose, following a faint trail only his senses could detect. Tom walked behind him, scanning the ground for anything that might confirm the dog's lead. Broken twigs, scattered leaves, and a faint pattern of disturbed soil guided them deeper into the woods. Tom could feel his heartbeat thudding like a distant drum inside his ribs. He kept thinking of the shoe and the blood smear on the truck, and the way danger always seemed to find the innocent first. After several minutes of silent tracking, Cooper stopped in front of a cluster of tall rocks. Thick brush wrapped around the stone like a tangled curtain. Cooper sniffed the air again and let out a quiet, encouraging sound. Not a growl, but a soft note meant to reassure. Tom crouched beside him, pushing leafy branches aside. Beneath the shadowed overhang of a rock shelf, he saw movement. Something small curled into itself. For a moment, he almost thought it was an animal. But then he saw the outline of thin arms and small shoulders. Tom leaned closer, his voice soft and steady. "It is all right," The shape flinched, and a faint trembling sound reached his ears. Cooper lowered his head and crawled forward just enough to show his presence without threat. He let out a gentle breath and wagged his tail once in a slow, careful movement. The child lifted her face slightly. She was a girl about 9 years old, with tangled light brown hair matted by dried mud. Her face was streaked with soil and tear marks that had dried on her cheeks. Her skin was pale, and her eyes wide with fear. She wore a thin shirt that was ripped at the sleeve and faded jeans torn at the knees. Her right leg was scraped and red from sliding over rocks. She looked exhausted and frightened, but also alert, like a small creature who had run too far and no longer knew where to hide. Tom spoke softly. "I am here to help." The girl blinked, as if struggling to believe him. Cooper moved closer and gently licked her hand. She froze at first, then slowly lowered her shoulders and let out a shaky breath. Tom recognized that breath. It was the sound of a child at the edge of collapse, finally sensing safety. "My name is Emma," the girl said in a thin, trembling voice. Tom nodded slowly. "Emma." Tears filled her eyes again, and she wrapped her arms around her scraped legs. She looked at Tom with a mix of desperation and hope. "They took my mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked as she said it. She closed her eyes, as if the memory returned too vividly. Tom waited patiently, letting her find the words without pushing. He had seen that expression in refugees and children overseas. The look of someone carrying more fear than their small frame could hold. Emma took a breath and continued. "There were men with guns. They were waiting near the creek. My mom and I were hiking. She saw them dumping metal barrels from a truck. Big barrels. They rolled them into the water. The water turned cloudy. My mom said we needed to leave, but they saw us. They grabbed her. She told me to run. She pushed me. I fell. I ran and ran, and I could hear her calling me. Then I heard trucks. Then I heard nothing." Her words dissolved into quiet sobs. Tom felt a heavy ache in his chest. The thought of a mother fighting to protect her child stirred something deep inside him. He remembered families he had seen in distant deserts and the faces of children whose lives were torn apart by forces they could not understand. Emma carried that same hollow fear. Tom breathed in slowly, grounding himself. He had heard the name of the chemical plant before. It was a large facility that produced industrial solvents and had been the subject of rumors since long before he moved to the town. Locals whispered about runoff in the rivers and deals made behind closed doors, and he knew Sheriff Dalton by reputation. A tall, broad man with a booming voice and a polished uniform. A man who smiled too widely when election season came around. A man known for shaking hands with the wealthy owners of that plant while ignoring complaints from small families living near the river. Tom understood immediately why Emma was alone and why her mother had been taken. If the sheriff was involved, there would be no safety in reporting this. The authorities meant to protect the innocent would instead bury the truth. He looked at Emma. She was crying quietly, her small body trembling. Cooper stayed close and nuzzled her arm. She pressed her face into the dog's neck and clung to him. Cooper remained still, letting her hold on. Tom made his choice with a calm certainty that settled through him like a returning instinct. "We cannot stay here," he said gently. "There are people looking for you. We need to move through the forest. I will keep you safe." Emma nodded, though fear still clung to her expression. She tried to stand, but winced at the pain in her leg. Tom crouched and lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing in his arms. Cooper walked ahead, sniffing the air for danger, then circling back to check on Emma with soft licks to her fingers. Tom carried Emma through the darkening woods, listening for the sound of engines or voices. The slopes leveled into a narrow deer trail, marked by flattened grass and scattered leaves. The air grew cooler, and the forest around them thickened into a maze of trunks and brush. Emma rested her head against Tom's shoulder and clutched Cooper's fur when the dog stayed close beside them. Tom kept his pace steady. Each step reminded him of why he had survived the war. He had believed for years that he returned home empty and broken. Yet in this moment, with a frightened child in his arms and a loyal dog leading the way, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. That quiet fire inside him burned again. He whispered softly to Emma, "You are safe now. I will get you away from here. Cooper and I will not leave you." The woods seemed to listen as they moved deeper into the dark. The danger from the sheriff and the men at the plant lingered like a shadow behind them, but Tom kept going. With Cooper on alert and Emma clinging to hope, they disappeared into the trees, guided only by instinct and the need to protect. And with each step, Tom knew that the path ahead would be hard. But he also knew he could not turn back. The night deepened over the Appalachia foothills with a heavy quiet that wrapped the forest like a thick blanket. The air was cold and dry, with a faint drift of mist floating low across the uneven ground. The sky above was a dark canvas, with only a thin scattering of dim stars and the moon hidden behind heavy clouds. A distant wind moved through the treetops, carrying the scent of pine bark and damp earth. In that stillness, Tom Miller walked with tense steps, guiding Emma deeper into the woods, while Cooper moved ahead with alert discipline. The darkness pressed in from every side. Tom could feel the pressure of it settle across his shoulders like old weight he thought he had left behind. He held Emma close as they moved along the narrow deer path. Cooper stayed a few paces ahead, nose low ears, high reading scents and sounds too faint for any human to detect. Every few seconds he paused, looked back at them, then continued with cautious purpose. Tom felt his pulse quicken with each step. Behind them, somewhere near the mountain road, danger was already gathering. He knew it. He felt it in the way Cooper stiffened earlier, the way the dog listened to the silence as if expecting it to shatter. Tom held Emma tighter. Her small arms wrapped weakly around his neck. She was exhausted and in pain, and her breathing came out in uneven, soft bursts. Her scraped leg had begun to swell slightly, but she tried to stay quiet, holding on to Tom with both trust and fear. They had climbed nearly half a mile through the wooded hills when the first distant sound broke through the night. A sharp, echoing wail drifted across the trees. It was the unmistakable cry of a police siren. The noise bounced between the ridges, growing louder, then fading before rising again. Tom stopped for a moment, listening with his breath held tight. Another sound followed, the deep bay of a tracking hound. Then another. Then the crackling buzz of a radio carried by someone moving through the forest. Emma clung to Tom, her voice barely a whisper. They found the truck. Tom tightened his jaw. He did not answer her because she already knew the truth. Sheriff Dalton had discovered the overturned pickup and the missing child. Tom imagined the sheriff, a tall, heavy-built man with steel gray hair combed neatly to the side and a square jaw that made him look strong and trustworthy to those who did not know him. Dalton carried a presence that filled a room and a booming voice that demanded attention. But behind his clean, pressed uniform and polished badge lay a man who had made too many deals in the shadows. A man who chose the powerful factory owners over the small families living near the polluted streams. A man who would do whatever it took to hide the truth Emma carried. Tom knew that the sheriff would not stop. Dalton would not risk a child's voice exposing what her mother had seen. And that meant he would send dogs officers and flashlights sweeping through these woods until either Emma was recovered or silence was achieved by force. Tom lowered Emma to the ground with care. She winced, but steadied herself by leaning slightly against Cooper, who remained perfectly still for her. Tom glanced at the dark forest around them, then spoke softly. "We cannot stay low ground. We need height. We need a vantage point." He knew a place. A structure he had passed during one of his long, isolated hikes. A wildfire lookout tower that had been abandoned decades ago and left to weather in the forest. Most locals did not know the path to it. Only hunters and hikers who ventured far off marked trails ever stumbled upon it. Tom had found it months after returning home back, when he still tried to walk until his mind grew quiet. He motioned for Cooper and took Emma's hand, helping her limp along the barely visible hunter's path. The trail wound sharply upward between thick oaks and tall pines. The climb grew steeper with each step, and Tom's breath deepened, but he pushed through the tightening in his chest. He felt the pressure of being pursued like a hand gripping his spine. He could almost hear the footsteps behind him, even though the sounds of the sirens had faded. Emma stumbled once. Tom immediately lifted her again, sensing her trembling through her clothes. The child was brave, but fear and exhaustion weighed heavily on her small frame. Cooper walked close, pressed against Tom's leg, showing silent support. After several long minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing. The old watchtower rose in the center, leaning slightly to one side. It was a tall wooden structure, built on thick beams, with a narrow ladder climbing to the top platform. The wood was weathered to a gray tone, and patches of moss clung to the posts. The tower looked fragile, but Tom knew it was still strong enough. It had survived storms far worse than this night. Tom set Emma down beside one of the beams. "Stay close," he said softly. Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear and trust. Cooper remained beside her as Tom tested the ladder. The wood groaned beneath his weight, but held firm. He returned to Emma, lifted her gently, and climbed carefully, step by step, with the child in his arms. Cooper followed from below, pacing with protective focus. At the top, Tom set Emma down inside the small square platform enclosed by waist-high railings. The tower offered a clear view of the forest. Dark shapes of trees stretched endlessly in every direction. Here the air felt colder and thinner and carried the faint echo of distant dogs. Tom felt a heavy knot form inside him. He needed to help Emma now before her injury worsened. Kneeling beside her, Tom opened the small pouch he kept clipped to his belt. Inside were basic medical supplies left from his service days. He cleaned the dried blood from her leg, using gentle, steady motions. Emma winced, but stayed still. Her face was pale under the dim light. Tom applied a bandage and wrapped it securely around the scraped area. He inspected her breathing, her pulse, and the clarity in her eyes. She was tired, but stable. As he worked, Tom felt the weight of two battles pressing in on him. One battle raged out in the forest, where dogs and men searched for them with growing urgency. The other battle raged quietly in his mind, where memories of war drifted up like smoke. The sirens reminded him of alarms from overseas. The baying hounds echoed voices he had heard in distant mountains, and the cold night wind brought back the smell of dust and burning metal. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could feel the trembling in his own hands. The chaos of the past pushed against the edges of his mind. He knew how quickly fear could break him open. Then a warm weight settled against him. Cooper had climbed the last steps of the ladder and now rested his head on Tom's chest. The dog's fur was warm and smelled of earth and pine. Cooper's breath rose and fell in slow, steady waves. Emma watched quietly, as if sensing how much that simple gesture mattered. Tom placed one hand on Cooper's head, grounding himself in the present. The warm pressure of the dog's presence kept him steady. Cooper had done this countless times during nights when nightmares cut through Tom's sleep. Tonight, the dog did it again, without hesitation. Below them, the faint glow of flashlights flickered through the trees. The dogs bayed again, their distant cries echoing up the slopes. Emma shivered and leaned close to Tom. "They are getting closer," she whispered. Tom put an arm around her shoulders. His voice was low but steady. "They will not find us up here. We stay quiet. We stay calm. We wait until they move farther down the valley." He knew the forest, and he knew how searches were conducted. Dalton's men would sweep the lower trails first. They would assume a child would head downhill, not up. This tower was invisible from most angles. It was the safest place for now. As Emma rested her head against his shoulder and Cooper remained pressed against his chest, Tom stared into the darkness. The fear was still there. The memories were still there. But for the moment, he held them back with the simple presence of the child and the dog he swore to protect. The night stretched long ahead. Their enemies moved beneath them, and Tom waited in the shadows, prepared for whatever would come next. The storm rolled over the mountains with a heavy cold that wrapped the forest in trembling shadows. The air was thick with the sharp scent of wet pine as the wind cut through the trees. Dark clouds pressed against the sky, leaving only brief shivers of light between them. Rain gathered in fine mist that drifted across the forest floor. The temperature dropped steadily as the storm built its strength over the ridges of Appalachia. The coming night settled in with a sense of warning. Tom Miller felt that warning in his bones as he knelt beside Emma inside the old fire tower. Her breathing had grown shallow and uneven. Her skin was flushed with fever, and her eyes struggled to stay open. She leaned weakly against the wooden wall, while Cooper lay with his head across her legs, offering whatever comfort he could. Tom placed the back of his hand against her forehead and felt searing warmth. The scrape on her leg had gone from red to an angry swelling, and her body trembled from the infection spreading inside her. A deep fear took hold in Tom's chest, far sharper than any fear he had felt during his service overseas. Emma whispered softly, her voice thin and distant. "It hurts." Tom steadied his breathing, though panic tried to rise in him. He had seen children hurt before. He had seen fever take people with terrifying speed. But here in the cold tower, with night approaching, he felt more helpless than he had felt in any desert or battlefield. He looked out into the dark forest, trying to plan. The storm clouds were closing in. The temperature was dropping. If he did not find medicine soon, Emma would not last the night. He ran a hand over his face, pushing sweat and rain from his temples. Cooper watched him with alert amber eyes. The dog sensed the urgency and let out a low, soft sound meant to comfort, but also to remind Tom that Emma needed him now more than ever. Tom knelt beside Emma and spoke in a calm, low voice. "I need to go and find something for your leg. There is an old hunting shed up the ridge. Hunters sometimes keep supplies there. I will be as fast as I can." Emma blinked slowly, fear creeping into her expression. "You are leaving." "Only for a little while," Tom whispered. "Cooper will stay with you. You will not be alone." Cooper rose immediately, understanding his role. He stepped beside Emma and pressed his warm body against her side. The child stroked the dog's fur with trembling fingers. Some of the tension left her shoulders. Tom stood and tightened the straps on his worn jacket. The storm wind rattled the tower walls, and heavy drops of rain began to fall through fissures in the old roof. Tom knew he had only a brief window before the storm became too strong to travel. His mind raced through the memories of every trail he had walked. The hunting shed sat higher on a rocky ridge and could only be reached by climbing a steep path that narrowed into ledges near the top. In calm weather, the climb was risky. In a storm, it bordered on deadly. But he had no choice. He looked at Cooper. "Watch her." The dog lay down beside Emma and placed his head near her shoulder as if forming a protective wall. His stillness reassured Tom in a way words never could. With one last look, Tom stepped into the storm. The rain struck immediately, soaking through his shirt and chilling his skin. The wind tore at the branches above him, creating a chorus of sharp rattling sounds. Tom pushed forward through the thick brush, climbing the incline that led toward the ridge. Each step sank into wet mud, making him fight for balance. Lightning flashed far away, and thunder rumbled across the valley. Tom felt the weight of urgency driving him faster. His thoughts drifted back to Emma, pale and trembling, and to Cooper, staying behind without hesitation. A tight knot formed in his chest. He refused to lose her. Not a child who had already run from terror. Not a child who trusted him. The storm roared louder around him, as if testing that resolve. When he reached the base of the ridge, the climb steepened. Sharp rocks jutted from the hillside, slick with rain. He gripped roots and ledges, pulling himself upward. Several times his boots slipped against the wet stone, sending his heart racing. Cold wind lashed at him as the ridge narrowed. He moved sideways along a thin ledge pressed against the rock face. One wrong move could send him down into the forest below. His breath came in short, harsh bursts, but he kept climbing, using every ounce of strength left in his body. Halfway up, the wind surged hard enough to shove him sideways. He clung to a branch until the gust eased, then continued upward through the pouring rain. The storm howled across the ridge. His clothes clung to him heavy with water. Yet the image of Emma, fading in fever, pushed him forward. At last he saw the faint outline of the old hunting shed perched on the ridge. It was a small wooden structure built decades ago. The door hung crooked and the roof sagged slightly, but it still stood against the storm. Tom pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale with the scent of dust and old leather. A broken lantern lay on the floor, and a few rotting crates sat in a corner. Tom rummaged through them with shaking hands. He found a metal box, rusted on the outside but intact inside. Within it lay bandages, a small bottle of antiseptic, and a roll of gauze, stiff but usable. Relief washed through him. He also spotted a small tin of ointment left by hunters. It would help ease Emma's swelling. Tom slipped everything into his jacket, then stepped back into the storm. The climb down would be worse. Rain now poured in sheets, and wind tore at him with twice its earlier force. He braced himself and began his descent, gripping rock and root with frozen hands. The ridge grew slicker by the minute, and Tom struggled for balance. At one point, his foot slipped from a wet rock, sending him crashing to his knees. His body lurched forward, and for an instant he felt his weight shift toward the cliff edge. A snapping gust of wind knocked him sideways. His hand slipped again, and he felt his body sliding. His heart hammered. He dug his boots into the mud, trying to stop the fall, but gravity pulled him toward the empty space below. Panic shot through him like a jolt. He reached wildly for anything. Then something strong seized his sleeve. Cooper. The dog had climbed up the ridge, following Tom through the storm. His jaws were clamped tightly on Tom's jacket sleeve, pulling back with desperate force. Tom regained footing and pressed himself against the rock, breathing hard. Cooper released his grip only when Tom was steady, then stood close, his fur soaked and pressed flat against his ribs. Tom touched the dog's head, grateful beyond words. With Cooper beside him, they made their way down the ridge, slowly, using the dog's instinct to choose the safest path. The storm weakened slightly by the time they reached the tree line, though wind still whipped branches overhead. Tom felt exhaustion weigh down his limbs, but he pushed forward, carrying the supplies. When they reached the fire tower, Emma still lay curled against the wooden wall, her breathing fast and uneasy. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard Tom climbing the ladder. Cooper rushed to her side, pressing himself gently against her arm. Tom knelt beside her and cleaned the wound with steady, careful motions. He applied the antiseptic and bandaged her leg with the gauze. Emma winced, but managed a small nod of gratitude. The fever still clung to her, but the medicine would slow the infection. Night deepened fully around them. Rain pattered against the walls, and wind moaned through the old beams. Emma trembled with cold and fear. Tom sat beside her, leaning his back against the wall. He spoke in a quiet voice, telling her stories about the soldiers he once served with. He chose the softer stories, the ones about teamwork and overcoming fear together. He taught her simple breathing exercises, turning them into a game of counting the rhythm of her breath. Emma slowly relaxed her breathing, easing into steadier waves. She rested her head against Tom's shoulder. Cooper lay between them, his warm body forming a bridge connecting the two. His steady presence eased the tension in Tom's heart. Tom placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the warmth through the damp fur. The storm raged outside, but within the tower, there was a small, fragile peace. Tom listened to Emma's breathing growing calmer, and watched Cooper close his eyes as if guarding them, even in sleep. The night was long, but they faced it together. The morning settled over the small mountain town with a pale gray sky hanging low above the rooftops. The air was cool and still carrying the smell of damp pavement after a light night rain. Thin clouds drifted slowly over the ridges of Appalachia, leaving the town in a muted quiet that felt tense beneath the surface. The streets were mostly empty except for a few cars rolling past the diner and the low hum of engines from the nearby garage where Tom Miller worked. Tom stepped through the garage door, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every muscle. His clothes still carried faint traces of forest soil from the night before, though he had washed as much away as he could. His eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep and from the pressure of fear that had grown heavier since he left Emma and Cooper in the woods. Today, he needed to become invisible again. He needed to blend back into the rhythm of town life even as danger tightened around him like a drawn net. Inside the garage, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, casting long, dim streaks across the concrete floor. Tom's boss, a stout man named Greg, with a round face and thinning hair, glanced at him briefly. Greg had a habit of frowning even when nothing was wrong. His short, wide frame and heavy steps gave him the appearance of someone who had spent half his life lifting engines and the other half dragging fatigue home each night. He was not unkind, but he had grown wary after years of running a failing business. He depended on reliable workers and disliked anything that hinted at trouble. "You picked a good day to skip out," he muttered while wiping grease from his hands. "Sheriff Dalton was looking for you. Something about an accident on the North Road." Tom kept his voice steady. "I was sick yesterday, needed rest." Greg studied him with narrowed eyes. "You look worn out. If there is something you are mixed up in, you better leave it alone. The sheriff is not someone you want on your back. If your name gets tangled in something bad, I cannot keep you here." The words landed like small hammers against Tom's chest. He nodded silently, hiding the tension that threatened to break through. He knew Dalton was tightening his search. He knew the sheriff had begun connecting Tom's sudden absence with the wrecked truck and the missing child. But he could not let anyone suspect what he was truly doing. Greg wandered away, still muttering under his breath, leaving Tom alone at the workbench. Tom forced his hands to stay steady as he organized tools and sorted bolts. His mind, however, never stopped racing. The sheriff was moving faster than he expected. Later in the morning, Tom saw a police cruiser roll slowly past the garage. He recognized the driver, a deputy named Harris. Harris was tall, with thick arms, and a square face marked by a permanent scowl. His sandy-colored hair was cropped close to the scalp, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who enjoyed authority. He drove past twice, then parked across the street, and stepped out, watching the garage with too much interest. Tom felt a cold knot form in his gut. Harris was following Dalton's orders. They were watching him. During lunch break, Tom stepped outside, pretending to stretch. Harris leaned against his cruiser, arms crossed. He did not speak, but his eyes followed Tom with silent suspicion. Tom looked away and kept walking around the building, trying to calm the pounding in his chest. He knew that if they searched his truck or followed him into the woods, everything would collapse. He needed to act quickly and carefully. After work, Tom drove slowly through town, acting like nothing was wrong. He stopped at the small supply store, picking up canned food bread, a bottle of water, and pain medicine. He paid quietly, avoiding conversation. The clerk barely glanced at him. Outside, the sky had begun to dim toward late afternoon, the clouds hanging heavier than before. Tom carried the supplies to his truck, then carefully unscrewed the cap of the spare gas can he kept in the truck bed. Inside the can, he had emptied the fuel, days ago creating a hollow space. He wrapped the food and medicine in cloth and slid them inside the can. To anyone looking, it appeared to be just a spare tank. To him, it was a lifeline for Emma. He drove toward the edge of town and pulled into an old gas station where the attendant barely paid attention to anything beyond counting change. Tom parked near the pump and glanced around. No sign of Harris yet. Cooper sat upright in the passenger seat, wagging his tail lightly, sensing the tension, but staying alert. Tom had brought him along for one specific reason. He whispered to the dog, Make noise when I tell you. Cooper tilted his head, then let out a soft grunt, as if he understood. Tom stepped inside the station to pay for a small amount of fuel, hoping to make the stop look normal. As he handed the cash to the attendant, he heard the unmistakable sound of a police radio outside. Harris had arrived. Tom's pulse quickened. He needed an opening. He slipped back outside and saw the deputy's cruiser pull up near the pump. Harris scanned the area looking for anything out of place. Tom tapped the side of his truck lightly. Cooper jumped out immediately, sprinting across the station driveway. The dog barked loudly, his deep voice echoing off the walls as he darted toward the road. The sudden noise startled Harris, who turned sharply toward the sound. The deputy cursed under his breath and hurried after the dog, trying to stop him from entering the street. In that brief moment, Tom climbed into the truck, started the engine, and rolled away from the station, keeping his speed calm and controlled. Harris was too distracted to notice. Cooper circled back and leapt into the truck before Tom accelerated down the road, leading into the forest. Tom felt his breath release in a long, tight exhale. Cooper had bought them precious time. They followed the narrow, gravel road into the woods until the trees grew thick again. Tom parked the truck behind an outcrop of rocks and grabbed the disguised gas can. Cooper trotted ahead, guiding the way. Tom moved carefully, watching for any sign of pursuers. The forest was quiet and heavy with evening air. After a long walk, the trees opened into a small clearing near an old ranger station. The building was made of thick, weathered logs and sat low against the slope. Its windows were dusty, and the door hung slightly crooked, but the wooden walls were sturdy. Inside the station, an old radio sat on a table covered in dust. It was outdated, but might still be useful. Tom guided Emma from her resting place among the trees and helped her inside. Cooper circled the room, sniffing corners, then lay down near the door, acting as a silent guard. Tom placed the food and medicine on the table and looked at Emma. Relief softened her tired expression. The danger was still close, but they had reached a safer place for now. The walls of the ranger station were thick enough to shelter them from the cold. The old radio waited for someone to breathe life into it. And for the first time since the chase began, Tom felt they had a small, fragile chance to stay ahead of the net closing around them. Night settled thickly over the old ranger station as a blanket of darkness pressed against the wooden walls. The air was cold and unmoving, with a faint scent of damp soil drifting in through the cracks. A few weak stars flickered through narrow gaps in the clouds, but most of the sky remained hidden in a heavy black veil. Inside the station, the shadows stretched long across the dusty floor as Tom Miller lit the small lantern he had found earlier in a corner. The dim, warm glow touched the worn furniture and the aged radio on the table. It was a fragile light against the vast night outside. Tom moved with quiet urgency. He set the lantern near the radio and lowered himself onto a creaking chair. Cooper lay close to the door, his large frame stretched across the floor like a living barrier. His ears twitched with each distant sound, and his eyes remained sharp and alert. Emma slept on the narrow cot against the back wall. Her breathing was steady, though soft from exhaustion. The bandage on her leg had helped, and the fever that once threatened her life had begun to recede. Still, Tom felt a constant pressure in his chest, knowing that the danger around them grew heavier with each passing hour. He pulled the battered radio toward him. The device was old, with a metal casing faded by time, and dust settled into the grooves. Parts of the wiring were frayed, and the antenna cable had snapped at the base long ago. Tom set out the small tools he had collected earlier, along with the heavy battery he had pulled from the abandoned truck near the road. The battery was corroded, but still held a faint charge. With hope and determination, he began his work. He unscrewed the back of the radio and inspected the wiring with careful hands. The soft tremor in his fingers reminded him of long nights in distant bases when he had repaired equipment under pressure with the threat of danger just beyond the walls. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. The memories rose like smoke, but he pushed them aside and focused on the task. Cooper sensed his tension and let out a quiet breath, though he did not move from his place. Tom stripped the ends of the broken antenna wire and wrapped them tightly around the metal contact. He scraped corrosion from the battery terminals until they shone faintly. Then he connected the wires one by one, listening for any sign of life in the radio. A small spark snapped when he touched the final wire, and the faint hum of electricity whispered through the device. The radio did not fully power on, but a weak static crackled for a moment. It was enough to keep hope alive. After securing the radio, Tom pulled his old phone from his pocket. The screen was scratched and slow, but it still worked. He sat beside Emma and quietly recorded her testimony. She spoke with small, hesitant breaths, describing the time of day when she and her mother saw the men near the creek, the direction the trucks had come from, and the license plate numbers painted in black on the rear panels. She repeated the name of the old quarry, where the trucks often appeared. Though her voice shook, she recounted the details clearly. When she finished, Tom whispered that she had been brave. She slowly drifted back to sleep. The station fell silent again. Tom stared at the lantern flame as worry pressed against his thoughts. The testimony was valuable, but not enough. He needed proof that could expose the truth and protect Emma. He needed a recording of what happened at the quarry. He felt the weight of the decision, but he knew there was no other way. He rose from his chair and approached Cooper. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes steady. Tom knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay with Emma," he whispered. "Protect her." Cooper let out a quiet sound, but remained still, guarding the door. Tom slipped his phone into his jacket and stepped outside. The night air was colder than before. The forest loomed like a dark maze stretching in every direction. Tom moved quickly, but silently, keeping low and using the trees as cover. Leaves whispered under his boots, and branches swayed in the wind. He descended the slope toward the direction Emma had described earlier. The old quarry lay beyond the ridge, a place of deep pits and abandoned machinery. The walk took time, but Tom's steps remained focused. His mind sharpened with each yard he crossed. The quarry came into view as a wide open scar in the earth. A single dirt road cut across its edge. Lights flickered near the far side where trucks were parked. Tom crouched behind a boulder and pulled out his phone, switching it to record. Through the shadows, he saw two large tanker trucks with metal barrels stacked behind them. Men moved around the site wearing heavy jackets and gloves. Their movements were brisk. One truck backed toward a deep pit carved into the quarry floor. With a loud metallic thud, the men pushed the barrels into the hole. The barrels struck the bottom and echoed across the dark landscape. Tom zoomed the camera, capturing the truck's license plate and the faces of the workers as best as the dim light allowed. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through the night. A man shouted and pointed toward the ridge. A flashlight swung across the quarry and landed briefly near Tom's hiding place. His heart jolted. He tucked the phone into his pocket and sprinted toward the trees. Gravel scattered beneath his boots as he pushed himself up the slope. Shouts followed him. The hum of an engine roared to life. An ATV burst from the quarry path, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The driver was a broad man with a heavy jacket and a thick beard. His silhouette was intimidating against the lights, and his aggressive posture made clear he was willing to hunt whoever had been watching. The ATV sped toward Tom, its tires grinding into the dirt. Tom darted behind trees and pushed through undergrowth fighting panic. Every breath came hard as the ATV closed in. Then from the shadows, a fierce bark cut through the chaos. Cooper sprang forward, his body a streak of dark fur. He collided with the front wheel of the ATV, trying to halt its advance. The impact knocked Cooper sideways, sending him tumbling across the rocky ground. A smear of blood streaked the stone, and Tom felt his heart seize. Cooper struggled to stand, but the ATV swerved away, shaken by the sudden attack. Tom reached the dog in seconds, dropping to his knees. Cooper let out a low, pained breath and nudged Tom's hand. Tom felt fear tear through him, but he lifted Cooper quickly and disappeared into the forest before the ATV could circle back. They ran as far as the dog's injury allowed. Only when the quarry lights faded did Tom stop. Cooper trembled, but stayed conscious. Tom held him close, feeling the pounding of his own heart echoing in his ears. The proof was on his phone. But the cost had been carved into the ground behind them in that streak of blood. The dawn rose slowly over the Appalachian ridges, casting a pale silver light across the steep slopes. Thin mist drifted between the trees, and the air carried the chill of a long night that had not yet fully loosened its grip. The wind whispered across the rocky ground, brushing the tops of pines and carrying the distant call of a hawk circling unseen above the valley. The forest seemed quiet, but beneath that quiet ran an undercurrent of danger that followed every step Tom Miller made. Tom moved through the shadows with Cooper limping at his side. The dog's once powerful stride had become uneven and strained. Dried blood matted the fur around his shoulder, where the ATV had struck him, and every breath he took came with a soft hitch. Yet Cooper stayed close, refusing to fall behind. His rugged frame still held determination, and his amber eyes followed Tom with unquestioning loyalty. Emma clung to Tom's other side. Her small hands gripped his jacket tightly as she stumbled over roots and stones. Her face streaked with tears and dust. She was trying to be brave, but terror trembled in her voice each time she whispered Cooper's name. Tom guided both of them through narrow cuts in the terrain, moving from boulder to boulder and stream to stream. He forced his mind to think like a soldier again, choosing paths that erased their trail. Cold water rushed around their ankles in the creeks, washing away footprints. Low-hanging branches masked their scent. Every instinct in him screamed that they had little time left. But he kept his breath slow, and even trying not to let Emma sense the fear gnawing inside him. When they reached a steep slope, Tom lifted Emma onto a ledge, then reached down to pull Cooper up. The dog growled softly in pain, but forced his body upward, leaning into Tom's support. Tom felt the weight of guilt in his chest. Cooper had risked everything for them. Now he was wounded, and Tom feared that if the chase continued, the dog might not survive. The thought burned in him like fire, but he pushed it aside. He could not fail either of them. The ridge they aimed for was still far above. It cut across the mountains like a long, narrow spine. Tom knew that if he reached its highest point, the radio signal would have a better chance of traveling through the mountains. Miguel was the only person he could trust now. Miguel had been a fellow soldier, a tall, strong man with warm brown eyes and a deep voice that carried calm into chaotic places. After leaving the army, Miguel had become a state police officer known for his honesty and his refusal to bow to local pressure. Tom had not spoken to him in months, but he hoped the old bond still held. Emma stumbled again, and Tom steadied her. Her eyes were red from crying and exhaustion. In a trembling whisper, she asked if Cooper was going to die. Tom stopped just long enough to crouch and look her in the eyes. He promised that Cooper was a fighter stronger than anyone he had ever known. She nodded and placed her small hand on Cooper's head. The dog leaned into her touch, offering a gentle look that soothed some of her fear. Then Tom urged them forward. Hours passed as they climbed. When they reached the ridge, the wind struck them hard, bringing the scent of pine resin and cold stone. The view stretched far into the valley. Below, the forest spread like a dark green sea. Tom scanned for movement, knowing Dalton and the hired gunmen were sweeping the area. He spotted faint glimmers of light on the lower trails. They were coming. Tom set Emma and Cooper behind a cluster of rocks, then assembled the makeshift radio. He connected the wires he had prepared earlier and attached the battery. The radio crackled faintly, a thin, fragile sound that gave him hope. He raised the antenna, improvising with a metal tent stake, and stretched it toward the sky. Then he clicked the transmitter. Static. He clicked again. More static. He adjusted the wires with shaking hands. A faint tone pierced the static, and he leaned closer. He spoke clearly, giving his name coordinates and telling Miguel that he had a child witness evidence of illegal dumping and a corrupt sheriff after them. Then he transmitted the video recording from his phone. The radio hissed, then steadied. The message went through. He exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. But there was no time to rest. Voices echoed up the mountain. Footsteps crunched through the brush. Tom pulled Emma close, and Cooper rose painfully to his feet. The dog placed himself in front of the girl, baring his teeth. A low growl rose from deep in his chest, though his injured shoulder trembled under the strain. His stance was protective, fierce, unbroken. Sheriff Dalton emerged first. He was tall, broad, and wore his dark uniform like armor. His jaw was square and covered with rough, graying stubble. His expression twisted with anger. Behind him came one of the armed men from the quarry, a sharp-eyed man with a narrow face and a long scar tracing down his cheek. Both held rifles. Dalton's voice cut through the cold air, filled with arrogance and practiced authority. He ordered Tom to surrender the child and the evidence. Tom lifted his rifle. For the first time since returning from war, his grip was steady, not from aggression, but from resolve. His eyes locked on Dalton, not with hatred, but with a clear sense of right and wrong, long buried beneath years of silence. To him, Dalton no longer looked like a man upholding the law. He looked like someone who had betrayed it and who had chosen to hunt the innocent. Tom stepped forward, placing himself shoulder to shoulder with Cooper, ready to defend Emma, even if it meant facing the barrel of Dalton's gun. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying tension like a wire pulled tight. Dalton raised his weapon. The armed man beside him took aim. Tom kept his rifle leveled, unwavering. Cooper growled, louder hackles rising despite the pain that shook his body. Emma clutched Cooper's, fur tears forming, again in her eyes. Then faintly at first, a sound rose from the valley. a distant siren echoing against the mountains. Another siren followed louder than the first. The men froze. Dalton's expression faltered. Tom did not lower his rifle. The sirens grew stronger, climbing the mountain road winding toward them. The backup he prayed for was coming. The final moment held like a breath suspended. The wind, the growls, the fear all bound together. And then Tom saw the colors of approaching state police lights flicker through the trees far below. Miguel had heard him. Help was on the way. The morning light rose gently over the Appalachian slopes, carrying the first colors of early autumn across the ridges. A thin layer of mist curled along the forest floor, and the breeze was cool, with the crisp scent of turning leaves. The sun lifted slowly, revealing splashes of gold and amber spreading through the treetops. It was the kind of morning that might have felt peaceful, if not for the tension that had built over the past days. Tom Miller stood on the ridge, with Cooper leaning against his leg, still limping from the wound on his shoulder. Emma stayed close, gripping Tom's sleeve with one hand. Her eyes were wide as she listened to the distant sirens rising from the valley below. Hope and fear collided inside her like two storms meeting in the same sky. Minutes later, the sound of engines rumbled through the trees. Multiple state police vehicles wound their way up the narrow mountain road, their lights slicing through the forest in sharp flashes of red and blue. When the first officers stepped through the brush, Tom recognized Miguel moving at the front. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with warm brown skin and calm, steady eyes framed by lines that life and service had carved there. His short, dark hair was touched with a hint of early gray, and his expression carried the same quiet authority Tom had known from years ago. Miguel approached, slowly taking in the scene. The rifles, the wounded dog, the frightened child, and Tom standing firm in the face of men who had broken the law they claimed to defend. Sheriff Dalton turned pale when he realized the state police had arrived. His broad frame stiffened and his jaw clenched tight. The armed man beside him lowered his rifle reluctantly as several officers moved forward, aiming their weapons with professional precision. Dalton tried to bark a command, but his voice cracked. Miguel signaled his team, and they disarmed both men, placing them in handcuffs. Dalton cursed under his breath, glaring at Tom with a mixture of disbelief and anger. But Tom did not look away. The weight that had pressed against him for years began to lift piece by piece. The officers escorted Dalton and the hired gun down the ridge. Miguel placed a firm hand on Tom's shoulder. "You did the right thing, Tom. You always were the stubborn, brave one." Tom looked down, unable to hold Miguel's gaze for long. A quiet thank you slipped from him, but most of his focus remained on Emma and Cooper. Emma hugged Cooper tightly, whispering that he was the bravest dog in the world. Cooper let out a tired huff and rested his head gently against her arm. From there, everything moved fast. The video Tom had recorded along with Emma's testimony was immediately transferred to the state police system. Environmental inspectors arrived within hours. The small team included a woman named Laura, who had sharp, observant eyes behind simple rectangular glasses. She was in her 40s, with shoulder-length dark hair and a calm, focused demeanor shaped by years of investigating environmental crimes. She watched the footage with a tight jaw and took detailed notes before coordinating with her team. The inspectors and state police moved together with swift precision. They raided the chemical plant and arrested its director, a tall, stern-looking man with silver hair and a rigid expression. His face was blank with shock as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. They secured documents and recorded evidence from the site, including the barrels and the dumping pits. The creek that had been poisoned for months would finally be cleaned. The town would finally know the truth. Meanwhile, Miguel sent a rescue team to search the abandoned warehouse Emma had described. They found Emma's mother locked inside a small storage room, guarded by two men connected to the plant. She had bruises on her arms, and her hair was tangled from days of fear and exhaustion, but her spirit remained intact. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with soft features, framed by chestnut-brown hair, and a voice that trembled with relief when she heard the officers tell her that her daughter was alive. She whispered, "Thank you again and again," as they guided her outside. At the hospital hallway, Emma waited with restless energy, her eyes searching every doorway. When her mother finally appeared escorted by a nurse, Emma ran forward with a cry that echoed through the corridor. The two fell into each other's arms, holding tight as if afraid the world might pull them apart again. Tears streamed down both their faces, mixing relief shock and overwhelming gratitude. For a long moment, they simply clung together, breathing in the reality that they had survived. Cooper sat nearby, tail thumping weakly as he watched them. Tom stayed a few steps back, leaning against the wall. He felt himself fading into the background, like a shadow on the edge of someone else's joy. His heart swelled for Emma, but a familiar ache whispered that he did not belong in moments like these. Then something unexpected happened. Emma pulled away from her mother, grabbed her hand, and then tugged her toward Tom. She ran straight into him, hugging him around the waist. She told her mother that Tom and Cooper were her mountain family. Her voice was small, but full of certainty. Her mother knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around both of them. She looked up at Tom with eyes full of gratitude. Without words, she thanked him for saving her child. Cooper received his own embrace as Emma leaned down and wrapped both arms around his neck. The dog closed his eyes and pressed his head against her chest. In that moment, Tom realized he was not just a shadow. He had become something solid in their lives, something needed. Months passed, and autumn deepened. Leaves across the Appalachians turned shades of gold red and amber, carpeting the forest floor. Tom had taken a part-time job as a ranger assistant, helping monitor trails and protecting wildlife. It was steady, simple work. He still repaired cars to make ends meet, but the rhythm of his days felt balanced for the first time in years. He spent more time outside, walking the ridges with Cooper, who now recovered, lay stretched in the sun near the station door. His fur had grown back around the scar, and he carried himself with pride. Emma visited often, bringing small drawings she made at school. She ran along the forest edge, her laughter ringing through the trees. Her mother joined her sometimes, grateful for the peace that had returned to their lives. In quiet moments, Tom still faced the old nightmares, the echoes of war that visited without warning. But now, when he woke shaking, there was the memory of Emma calling his name, the warm pressure of Cooper's head nudging his hand, the sound of footsteps on the porch. Signs that he was no longer fighting alone. He had found a place that felt like home among the turning leaves, a place where his strength protected others, and where his heart finally rested. In the quiet turning of the seasons, Tom, Emma, and Cooper discovered that even the darkest valleys can open into places of light. Their journey through danger, fear, and uncertainty became a reminder that courage often begins with a single act of kindness. A wounded man found his strength again through the trust of a child and the loyalty of a dog. A community rediscovered truth because one person chose to stand up for what was right. And a broken family was made whole through hope that refused to die. Every day, ordinary people show the same quiet bravery. They protect their neighbors, speak the truth, and reach out to those in need. These are the small miracles that shape our world, and I believe God places them gently in our path, reminding us that we do not walk alone. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. May God bless you with strength, peace, and compassion as you face your own mountains each day.